We're starting off with reactions to the ongoing violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Absolutely, a very striking piece in the British newspaper The Guardian this morning. They sent reporters to the Kivu province of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and what struck the reporters there is this sort of striking aesthetic difference between the M23 rebel fighters and the government soldiers. This is something our own correspondents have spoken of in terms of you're seeing the rebels now sort of smartly dressed, well equipped, well organised, contrasted to government soldiers who are, according to people they've spoken to on the ground, are running amok. They say that government soldiers are stealing food from shops in this area, that they're holding people up at gunpoint, raping women. Again, this is just from testimonies they've had on the ground. However, of course, with all these things, the report points out that there are people in the province who do not want to be sort of governed by the M23 rebels. They say that every child here knows that it's Rwanda who are backing these rebel fighters. Of course, that is something that Rwanda has consistently denied. So it's very interesting to see, therefore, a piece in the Rwanda New Times talking about the ongoing violence. They call this a piece of brotherly advice for the President Joseph Kabila, the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. They say that only diplomatic talks between the government and the rebels will move this conflict forward. It also quite interestingly points out that Rwanda, this article says that they believe that the DRC should stop listening so much to international influences and UN influences, the United Nations, the US. Instead, talk to its regional neighbours more. They say that it's the regional neighbours who understand the situation a lot better, and they therefore will be able to help mediate the process easier. And they also very strikingly say, do not sublet the state to NGOs. So a very sort of pointed argument towards letting sort of the region cope with its own problems there.
And talks are underway in Uganda
Absolutely.
right now.
Yeah.
We're going to move to the Middle East. The newspaper Haaretz is looking at the Palestinian bid for non-member observer status at the UN. That's a bit later on this week, isn't it?
Yeah, that's on Thursday this week. And in fact, this is what the Haaretz are calling secret talks between the US and Israel ahead of this bid on Thursday. A negotiator, Isaac Molho, according to the paper, flew unannounced to the White House. Now, what they were talking about seems to be how the US can get Israel on board to sort of mediate and moderate their reactions if this bid goes ahead as planned. The US saying that perhaps they're going to be sort of making a softer wording of the bid by the Palestinian Authority. However, the other big news that we're seeing a lot of in the Israeli media today is, of course, reaction to the news of the corpse of Yasser Arafat being exhumed. A piece in the Jerusalem Post, as you can imagine, this is an Israeli paper. It's typically quite scathing of these suspicions that he was poisoned by the Israeli state. However, quite an interesting point to pull perhaps out of that is the editorial asks, when there is a culture of suspicion like this, which is so endemic, these sort of conspiracy theories abound pretty much with every relationship between Israel and Palestine, it's difficult to make any agreements and accords based on trust when this culture of suspicion is sort of very commonplace, as is exemplified by this.
And in Bangladesh, the papers, of course, are still talking about those horrible fires, that big fire Saturday night.
Yeah, this was the fire in the garment factory, and we can see in the Bangladesh Daily Star photographs of huge protests. There were 15,000 people out on the streets. Workers now saying it was the authorities who were negligent. This is the Daily Star picking up on that. They don't seem to be waiting for any other judgment. They say that the workers have made their point clear. So it was the authorities, they say, that were negligent, forcing workers to stay in the factory even though the fire had been detected earlier.
And what are the papers saying about climate change talks in Doha?
Yeah, these are the UN talks in Qatar. The Guardian give a bit of a summary of the good, the bad and the ugly with regards to sort of climate change and who's the greenest of them all. So a thumbs up for Germany, but I'm afraid quite a poor show for China and Canada. And in fact, host Qatar themselves have had to defend themselves against people who say, should you be really holding these climate change talks when you've got the highest greenhouse gas output per capita emissions, the highest in the world. Very sceptical cartoon in the International Herald Tribune as well, a rather world-weary cartoonist saying, a climate change protester saying, the end of the world is nigh, it's coming December. One man who obviously is quite fed up with the Middle East ongoing disputes there say, do you promise?
And those talks are going on for 2 weeks in Doha. Thank you very much, Katerina. You're watching Live from Paris. A reminder of the headlines.